Yeah. Boxing aficionados. What's up? What's going on? So, I'd like to make this video in homage to Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran. And I'd like to make this video in order to illustrate the reasons why I believe that Roberto Duran is held in such high esteem by Latinos in general. For example, each ethnicity has their favorite fighters amongst the Latin community, Hispanic community. Mexicans have the Julio Cesar Chavez, Salvador Sanchez. Argentinians have Carlos, Monzon, or, Nicolino Deloge, Sergio Martinez. Puerto Ricans have Cotto, Ortiz, Wilfredo Gomez. But all Latinos, no matter whether you're Puerto Rican or Cuban or Dominican or Mexican, they hold Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran in very, very high esteem, right? So I've tried to pinpoint at what moment, the moment that became so. What was it that Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran, what was it that he was able to achieve to come to that lofty perch? And how did it come about? So, when Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran was in his heyday, I was, a baby, right? Baby. But people don't understand that Roberto Duran, some people don't understand that Roberto Duran had, two careers. Not that much different from George Foreman, whose career spanned, several generations. That's Roberto Duran. Some people think that Roberto Duran's career began with that Sugar Ray Leonard fight, or is closely tied to Sugar Ray Leonard, when the truth of the matter is that by the time Roberto Duran fought Sugar Ray, Duran was already a Hall of Famer. He was 70-1. He was 70-1 by the time he had the first Sugar Ray Leonard fight. He was already an icon. He was already an idol, an attraction, a legend. He was already a legend. People forget that because the media will, he's the Four Kings and all this other nonsense. That Four Kings stuff, that was his second career. His first career, right? The first half of his career that made him the legend happened all the way, 1968, 67? Okay? And the fight that endeared him to Latinos, at that time you have to understand that the relationship between Latino culture and New York City, what it meant, right? Because I believe that that's where Roberto Duran really was able to plant the seeds that created the legend and the love affair with the Latino community. Started in New York City. Yes, he's Panamanian, but New York City at the time was the hub of Latino culture. You know, you had your Puerto Ricans, you had your Cubans, you had your Dominicans, you know, Afro-Latino culture. You had very few Panamanians in New York City at that point. But basically, what we know as Latino culture, what you might think Latino culture is, or salsa and things like that, it was New York City, right? It was the melting pot of Latino culture. So, being and fighting regularly out of the, coming from Panama and fighting out of the Madison Square Garden now, I don't want to misrepresent myself and talk as if I was there. I obviously wasn't. I mean, I'd have to be in my 70s to be able to, claim something like that. And even then, I might not be old enough. So, I was about 4 years old, but that's when you start really paying attention, not paying attention, but, start remembering things in your memory banks, and you could remember adult conversations around you. And I remember hearing Roberto Duran a lot, Mano de Piedra and What It Meant, and, the energy that was in our home when he was about to fight, or the energy that was in our streets, New York City streets, summers, when Roberto Duran was about to fight. I remember it. And it was cross-cultural. It was Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, everybody, was pretty much excited about him fighting. So, in retrospect, I wanted to, find out why. How did that come to be? In my opinion, what makes sense is that you can pinpoint it to the fight at Madison Square Garden against Ken Buchanan. So what happened with Ken Buchanan, I remember that was a big fight. I also can tell you about what the climate in New York City was in retrospect, having living in the South Bronx at that time. For those of you that don't know what the South Bronx was in the 70s, circa 70, 72, and things like that, it was hell. Hell. Very violent place, very, very poor, poverty-stricken. And I remember the relationships between the residents of the ghetto, right? And the policemen that were patrolling them. It was real. I know of people who fought policemen. Tell it, take off that gun. We're gonna fight. So let's do it. It was that kind of antithesis. It wasn't defund the police, but it was definitely, a lot of these cops were very abusive, and the cops were basically all Irish at that point in New York City. You'd be hard-pressed to find a non-Irishman that was on the police force. I would say, conservatively, that the police department in New York City at that time was at least 80% Irish. I may be, and if it wasn't 80% Irish, then, it was definitely white, And that gives the background to the Ken Buchanan fight. So, Ken Buchanan was a Scottish fellow, came into the ring with these bagpipes. He was the Irishman, who they were backing with the bagpipes and all that, you know. And when Roberto Duran got in the ring against Ken Buchanan, he had the Latino community on his back. On his back, the Latino New York City community on his back. He carried all those residents of the ghettos of New York City, the Latino ghettos of New York City, right? Or rather, the Latino residents of the ghettos of New York City. He carried all of their interests on his back when he got in the ring and fought Ken Buchanan. Ken Buchanan, who got into the ring with the bagpipes, you know. To the Latinos, what do you think that's going to represent? When you hear the bagpipes, the St. Patrick's Day Parade. St. Patrick's Day Parade, which is dominated by, you know, the same Irish cops that abused a lot of Latinos in the community, right? So that was the background. That was the violence behind it. That was the angst, right? And when Roberto Duran did what he did to Ken Buchanan, put the beating that he put on Ken Buchanan, it was as if he was beating, you know, as if he was beating all the cops that abused all these Latino people. Now, you know, I'm not a leftist. I'm not by a long shot, you know. But I do remember. I remember that energy. I remember how celebrated that victory by Roberto Duran was in the ghettos of the South Bronx, and how everybody rejoiced over it. Didn't matter if you were, you know, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, whatever the hell you were. Roberto Duran kicked that man's ass for all of us. That's how they felt. Couple that with the fact that Roberto Duran hung out with some artists called the Fania All-Stars. The Fania All-Stars, who were the hottest thing in Latin music at the time, also birthed in New York City, had a very tight relationship with Roberto Duran. Or rather, Roberto Duran had a very tight relationship with him. So you could see Roberto Duran at El Corso, at Barney Google's, Ipanema, all those clubs that was Latin Quarters at that time. You would see, you know, Roberto Duran making the rounds in the city, hanging out with the people. He was very much a people's champ. And on that night against Ken Buchanan, he brought victory to the Latino people of New York City. And I believe that was the genesis for the all-and-out love affair that Latinos have had with Roberto Duran ever since. You understand? It is what it is, and it ain't what it ain't, baby. Recordando al gran Roberto Duran. I'm out. Next Level Boxing Talk, baby. Peace.